Welcome to another episode, Pound for Pound Boxing Report, episode 266. I am your host, Michael. Joining me this week. Well, first of all, we're back after taking a couple of weeks off. I went on vacation. I'm back, refreshed, recharged on the show this week. After a bit of a hiatus, uh, due to some, I'll just say on a bit of a hiatus. Gus from Corruption and Boxing, Daniel from the Inscriber. We hope to have Gail from Communities Digital News, Jacob from Jab Hook come on later on the show. What's going on, fellas?
What's happening, Mike?
Good day.
For those who are new to Pound for Pound Box Report, Pound for Pound Box Report live YouTube show, podcast, as well as blog discussing all things boxing. The motto is when boxing is good, we will talk about it. When it's bad, we will talk about it. Bottom line is, if it concerns the sweet science, we will talk about it. If you want to find out all the information regarding Pound for Pound Box Report, blog page is the place to go to. p4pboxingreport.wordpress.com. That's the link. Check the top right hand of the blog page. You'll find the links to where to find us all over social media, where to find us all platforms that carry a RSS feed, the donation links. Shout out to Gus for the donation over the past few weeks. If you want to donate, let donation be the best nation. Got a PayPal Cash Me link on the blog page, so I don't care if it's $1, $2, $5, 10, whatever you can spare. Please shoot some coins to Pound for Pound Box Report. On this particular episode, we're going to do something different here. Since there's not much happening in terms of fights, we're going to do the regular recap segment. And we're going to introduce something new here, kind of a boxing retrospective, as I like to call it, given that today is the 20th anniversary of Oscar De La Hoya Felix Trinidad fight. Took place September 18th, 1999. What I plan to do is kind of take a look back on that fight 20 years later. But let's get started by recapping the fights that happened this past weekend. We previewed these fights on the last episode a couple of weeks ago. Going to start with the most talked about, the biggest fight of the week. That is one Tyson Fury. Second trip to Las Vegas. He's fought Otto Wallin. I'll go to you, Gus. This has been a while since you've been on. Fury won, but he was not that impressive in my opinion. He was cut, two massive cut that forced him to get nearly 50 stitches. I look at this fight, Gus. His last fight against Schwartz was a no-1, but he still looked impressive. This was a drop off from that, even more of a drop off from the Deontay Wilder fight, which I still think he won, in spite of getting knocked down twice. Yes, he was cut, Gus, but to me, from jump, the sharpness was not there. The intensity was not there. He didn't seem to be fully engaged, and even after the fight, critics, even his father, was saying if this was Deontay Wilder, if this was Ruiz, if this was Anthony Joshua, he would have lost on the night. So I'm really interested in your perspective in what you saw from Fury and what you didn't see from Fury.
I mean, in one respects, Mike, the concerning cut which Wallin induced, I think it was the fourth round, was, to me, it was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because not only did it change the impetus and the strategy, but also the urgency of the fight. On the one hand, it gave Wallin sort of affirmation that he could not only, you know, land significantly on Tyson Fury, but it sort of galvanized him in the sense to continue his attacks to try and cause further deterioration and try and force a stoppage. So it really gave him that sort of belief. And conversely, for Tyson, once the ESPN broadcasters really stepped out of their jurisdiction where they had absolutely no right in changing the sort of course and destiny of a fight by going directly to the corner. And it doesn't matter whether it was right or wrong, but they've really got no jurisdiction to change, certainly a home fighter for them as well, and advise them that it was a cut as opposed to a clash of heads. So therefore, Tyson Fury realized that if the fight had been or was on the brink of being stopped, then he would obviously forfeit the fight as it was caused by a punch and not a cut, so it couldn't go to the scorecards. So Fury, from that point onwards, began. His objective was to obviously try and protect the cut because it was quite bad. So he elected to fight literally inside the pocket. Um, some of the shorter punch he was executing were decent, for somebody with a significant reach. But to me, Mike, the fight reinforced that his defense is highly suspect, and it has been ever since the Pajkic fight, where he was flawed. He's always had very bad defense at short range, at long range, where he can utilize his jab and he can use his footwork as his primary component for his defense. But on the inside, he doesn't have his feet to do so. He'll elect. He'll not even go back to a conventional guard to try and block or slip punches. He's just using upper body movement. He's rotating his head. He's changing his levels as well. And certainly elements of that were also apparent when Deontay Wilder caught him as well, because, he was clowning around, hands behind his back, not even a high guard. And he's just trying to change levels, duck down too low. And then Wilder eventually realized to aim for his chest, slap bang, knowing that he's going to dip his head and get caught. So I haven't seen too much evolution in his defensive ability over the years, Mike. I've always felt that he's been a highly overrated fighter. Superficially, he can make in quite a weak division, and let's face it, he can make the other fighters look terribly, and casual fans can somehow deduce that he is so far the best because of his ability. He does have skill, there's no doubt about it, and for such a large athlete, his ability to sort of dance around, utilize good footwork, utilize his jab, upper body movement to slip punches can look very aesthetically pleasing. But he's been doing that for a number of years, Mike. I haven't really seen too much of, improvements in certain aspects. He's still slapping a little bit with his punches at long range as well, Mike. I don't think he's really turning. And part of that may be due to the fact that he's always been a defensive fighter. Emanuel Stewart talked about that a number of years ago. That's almost his subconsciousness. Jab, straight right hand, and then use footwork to get out of there. So he's not going to overcommit. He's not going to stay too much at punching range. But I felt Wallin's strategy was very good, Mike. He was just short enough to try and get underneath Fury's jab from long range. So Tyson was having great difficulty in landing, but he was targeting the body throughout the fight. Certainly for the first few rounds, he was. And then when Tyson began to get back into the fight, Wallin, for some bizarre reason, he began to ignore the body and go up towards and try and land headshots. Now, I was a little bit disillusioned, but in listening to his corner, Joey DeMack, his trainers, he mentioned it to the ESPN commentators. So it was almost like his strategy that he was relaying to the fighters: start low at the body and then come up towards the head. I felt that was a mistake, but it's a natural target to aim for because he was cut, and obviously he induced another cut, but he was using very dirty tactics at the time, trying
Cuffing.
to use the inside. Sorry?
Yeah, he was cuffing with the hands.
Yeah. trying to use the inside of the glove in his laces to try and, you know, cause further deterioration to the cut, which, no, we know that, you know, that's absolutely ridiculous. But, you know, fighters are trying to take advantage of any opportunities they have. So, you know, that was his strategy. But, um, and it showed Mike, his power was still very good later on in the fight. He got buzzed up a few times during the later middle rounds, but he came back. Fury's bodywork began to cause him some fatigue as well in the latter rounds as well. But given that he, you know, the level of competition and the fact that he's been fighting on, you know, Swedish pay-per-view, you know, he wasn't a bad fighter, Mike. You know, I saw a little bit of him in the amateurs. You know, he did suffer 2 defeats against Anthony Joshua, but he beat a very good fighter, Mike, a very talented UK fighter. I think his name is Fraser Marshall, who's going to be competing at the next Olympics for Great Britain, and he's expecting to medal as well. So he's actually had a number of good victories in the amateur ranks as well. So he's not a bad fighter who turned over quite late at sort of 16, 17. He was fighting with real motivation as well, you know, to honor the memory of his father. So that gave him, you know, great belief and drive and determination as well. But so not a bad performance from him. But in terms of Fury, Mike, um, I'm not surprised, Mike. You know, I'm not surprised that, you know, Fury didn't look as sort of convincing. You know, he's not sitting down on his punches. He never really has throughout his career. You know, I think he could have tried and negated that southpaw and gone a little bit more on the southpaw stance, because I think he would have had better. Because Wallin was doing it very good in terms of negating his jab, so he really needed to change the angles of his punching by switching. But he resorted to fight more at short range because he was trying to stop his opponent, fearing that the fight would be stopped and he'd lose it on that, and then hence jeopardize whatever a 67 million pound rematch with Deontay Wilder. So you can understand, you know, you can understand his rationale for doing so as well. So all in all, Mike, I don't think it was a fantastic fight as ESPN were just emphasizing all the time. I felt it was kind of a sloppy sort of average fight, but it had a little bit of tension and drama as well. But you know, I'm happy for Valine, Mike. You know, he showed, you know, he showed me something that I saw in the amateurs. So I'm hoping, you know, he can capitalize and he can push forward with his career from that.
Well, for Wallin, at the very least, given how he performed, given that he went to the distance, this is going to garner him a few more fights, which means more money in the coin. I also want to give kudos to Joey Gamache, a former junior lightweight champion who's been training Wallin for the past 4 years. Gamache said in the lead up that he was going to give Fury a tough fight. I want to go back to you, Gus, before I go to Jacob. Jacob from Jab Hook, who's joined us as well. You mentioned how, on the one hand, Fury kind of resorted to fighting uh, close because of the cut, but then you mentioned how Fury's defensive weaknesses um, has to do with him on the inside. He can be hit on the inside. Let's take a larger look at the heavyweight landscape right quick. We know the fight with Wilder is upcoming, assuming Wilder beats Ortiz in the rematch. We saw how the first fight went. That defensive weakness that you talked about for Fury, it may not be exposed in a fight with, in a rematch with Wilder. I hear your criticism of him, Fury, and I'm thinking, could that be a weakness against the likes of an Andy Ruiz, who, despite what the criticisms that certain folks who will remain nameless had of Ruiz and um, leading up to the Joshua fight, the things that boxing fans really know is he's skilled, he's experienced, and he's very, very quick, particularly with the hands on the inside counterpunching. Let's just assume, just throw out there a Fury Ruiz fight. On the surface, it looks like a lot of people would just look at Fury and the height and whatever and just say he could just outbox Ruiz on the outside. My thing is, I look at this. What if Ruiz can get inside of the jab? Could a Fury be in trouble against the quick-handed Ruiz with the experience, with the guile, with the ability to counter on the inside? In which you just, given the context of what you talked about in terms of Fury's weaknesses, in terms of dealing with punches up close.
You know, Mike, I think Tyson Fury is a cerebral enough fighter to realize that he's going to have difficulties or potentially be in trouble fighting at that range where Andy Ruiz not only has two advantages. Number one, his hand speed. Number two, his counter punching ability, which is, I think, it's his best trait as a fighter. Something me and you have spoken about for a few years on
Yes,
here.
he does a terrific job
Yeah,
of exchanging with the guy. A lot of guys, they punch after you punch. He could punch with you without getting hit.
yeah, he's a brilliant counter puncher. So I think Fury will be aware of that. It'll be abundantly clear to him. But I think Fury possesses the footwork, Mike. He can fight tall, and I think he will just use his superior footwork because Andy Ruiz doesn't have good footwork, Mike. He he he's he's behind a quite good sort of rigid defense, but he eats up real space very, very slowly. He's not somebody who cuts that distance, has that acceleration to do so very, very quickly. So I think Fury's superior footwork will allow him just to keep that distance, Mike. Control range, control distance, use his extensive reach advantage and keep the fight at long range and just keep sticking and moving and circling and pivoting, jabs, jabs, straight right hands. And that should be sufficient for Fury to outbox him in that sense, I feel.
Okay, cool. Let's go on to Jacob. Gus, you had some criticisms of Fury in the aftermath. Uh, Jacob, he was even more critical of Tyson Fury. We were discussing the fight back and forth on Skype. Um, you was not you expressed not how can I put this? You had quite a bit to say about Tyson Fury in the aftermath of this fight against Wallin. I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk about that now in your breakdown of the fight.
Yeah, I mean it's no secret. I mean, for years I think that Tyson Fury has been overrated for a long time. So I echo a lot of what Gus said, previously, that I got to hear. But yeah, I mean, again, if you look at Tyson Fury's career, he hasn't been he's fought a few names, most notably the Vladimir Klitschko win was kind of what everybody hangs their hat on to define what Tyson Fury as this great fighter. But in my opinion, first of all, that's one of the worst fights I've ever seen. It was just completely just devoid of any action. Klitschko fought in a very uncharacteristic manner where he basically was very passive. I know Emanuel Stewart, I think that might have been his maybe a couple fights, or maybe even his first fight without Emanuel Stewart, who I think would have been on him to engage Fury more. But you know, Fury talks about like, oh, I'm gonna come and knock you out and do all this stuff. But to Gus's point, I mean, he is more cerebral. Like he knows that he doesn't have the best power in the world. He's better at long range, using his jab, using his height and his reach, and kind of just pot shotting and getting off his little combos here and there. But to me, he's not like a very very effective. Even in the Wilder fight, I know a lot of people had him winning, but even in the rounds that people say he won, he did little if nothing in those rounds. It was basically just Deontay Wilder's, who has limited skills, who's relied on his power the whole, every single fight pretty much. Um, he couldn't catch him, but he did catch him, and I think it was the ninth round, and then of course the famous 12th round. But you know, his opponent this time, I didn't know very much about him. I think the only video that surfaced, which was the shadow punch, where he knocked a guy out, but he didn't even connect, and the guy went down. So there was some questions about that. But I mean, he did a good account of himself. But again, Fury's not fighting guys that I would consider in the top tier of the heavyweight division. Yeah, these guys are undefeated. I'm not saying that they don't have any skill. But again, you can look fabulous against guys that aren't used to that spotlight or are not on that level. So I've always again had criticism with Fury. I think Reese can beat him. I think Dillian White can beat him. I think Joshua can beat him. I think Wilder can beat him when they rematch. If he tweaks a few different things instead of just trying to land like a giant punch, he uses jab more and at least put some hands on him to set up, his other punches. But until he loses, I guess convincingly, he's still gonna ride that train to he's the lineal, champion, he's the greatest and all this stuff. But I've always said,
Okay, let me interrupt you. ESPN, y'all need to stop that with Fury. I mean, for real. This he's not the champ. Period.
Yeah, he effectively retired, so he's no longer. That lineage is broken.
Right. They need to
Yeah.
stop that. Proceed, Jacob. My bad. I just had to go off on that bit of a
I
rant
mean,
there.
this is natural though. They have to hang their hat on something, So they grasp at straws and they talk about this lineal championship, this thing. But you're right. He doesn't have a belt. He hasn't, he didn't defend his belts when he had them. He took that hiatus. But the final thing I'll say about Fury is that, and I've been saying this for years, is that I don't know what it is, but I think he's gotten tons of mileage off his name. I think because of Mike Tyson, people associate the name Tyson with boxing, with ferocity, within the boxing world, and then Fury, just like someone that has that punches with fury, or he just has like the perfect name for a boxer. It's like almost like a weatherman who's named like Dallas Storms or whatever. Like he has a perfect name for a weatherman, however cooked that is. So I think he's gotten tons of mileage off that by fighting not the greatest opposition, and he's just been able to make it this far doing that. But I think he's in for a rude awakening when he steps up his competition with people like an Andy Ruiz, maybe like a White or Parker. Like I even think Joseph Parker could give him a hell of a fight and maybe even knock him out. Because even in that Wallin fight or Wallin fight, he he didn't. It wasn't like Wallin had a lot left in the tank. He was really tired, and the punches that he connected on Fury that hurt him weren't like devastating punches. So I think that he has been down before. I think what the cruiserweight Cunningham knocked him down. So you know I just think he's an accident waiting to happen. But he's done enough to get this deal with ESPN and Top Rank and to get all this money. So I mean he's going to be okay at the end of the day.
We're going to split
He
these
also,
fights up after. Go ahead, Gus.
he also got floored early on in his career by Neman Pikic years back. And he also got his ass beaten by John McDermott, but they never ruled it
Yes, he
a
did.
victory. Yeah, if you watch that fight, McDermott roughed him up, bullied him. So he's always been susceptible, Mike. That was the point I was trying to sort of reinforce. If people had actually studied some of his earlier fights, those vulnerabilities have been apparent. It was almost a recurring theme throughout. But back to you.
I go to you, Daniel. Your thoughts on the fight?
Well, I the fight itself was a surprise to me because of Wallin and his abilities. He he made sure that he was a respectable fighter, and for a good while did throw Fury for a loop, particularly in that punch that opened the cut. Now, What's interesting about this fight, and this is probably like the biggest debate out of all of this in the fight, is ESPN's role in this. Because, like I mentioned, that ESPN completely owns and informing Fury's corner that the cut wasn't caused by a headbutt, which they were told to initially, but rather a punch. And that might have changed Fury's game plan. It might have ultimately changed the course of the part of the argument. But then there's also this other part of the argument. Journalistically, it is the job of a reporter to correct a record if the person he's talking to is saying something wrong. So in that part, I see ESPN going into the right and asking to it, because what would have happened if they would have stayed mum? And Fury doesn't go all out, and then Wallin, the cut gets so bad that even the cut man wasn't able to do anything for it. And Fury thinks they're going to scorecards, so then they find out, no, it's from a head, it's from a punch, and you lose. It would create an absolute circus afterwards. It would be pretty much what Jesse Vargas thought what he did against Timothy Bradley, because Pat Russell misjudged the 10-second counter for the actual bet times 10. And yes, I understand the financial reasons. I understand ESPN is maintaining a 9-figure pay-per-view that they have to work with.
And that's the thing, Daniel. I've seen situations on HBO, Showtime, where, say, a Max Kellerman or whoever from Showtime has done an interview with a trainer in the corner and informed them about a situation. What has people, or some folks, I should say, vexed about the Fury fight was what you just said. There's a lot of fanboying going on when it comes to Fury from ESPN, and it's pretty obvious. And when you put that context in the backdrop, it's like, come on, y'all, really?
Yeah, that's the part put the wrong way, and I get the whole area where they're still trying to hype him up as a lineal champ when Gus is technically correct. He did effectively retire for 2 years. That lineage is broken. That lineage was then restarted with Joshua Klitschko, which technically, by merit, means Andy Ruiz is the lineal champion in a way. But what happens in this fight is also the fact that I agree with Jacob in certain aspects that Fury's overall game isn't as a lot of people thinks it is. It's mainly because when it comes to the Klitschko fight, he was able to out Klitschko as far as using distance and using his size to his advantage as far as evading punches. Yeah, it turned out to, and it became one of the worst fights you will probably ever see at that high caliber in heavyweight within the next probably. But the problem when it comes to Fury, and this is the main issue that I have with him picking fights against guys like this, the Otto Wallins, even though Otto Wallin, like I said, once again, I give complete credit to him. He showed up. He is going to make some money off this fight. He proved that he's at least European level. Between those, the first fight, the Seferis, you're not preparing him for really preparing him for the big fights. Yes, you can make the argument that Wilder, if he would have lost the championship, it wasn't for his knockdowns. That's a fair argument. At the same time, though, you don't think that Wilder's going to try to improve? You don't think that Wallin in action actually he sets up the punches this time? Because he himself said it. He didn't throw enough. When it came to Fury, he himself said it. He was waiting for that one big punch.
Yeah, for me,
And
it's not just the technical aspect that Wilder has to do, because from going into the possible rematch, Daniel, the onus is on him much more than it is on Fury. It's also physical. 209, 212, whatever he weighed, that was way too light. He has to get bigger and get stronger, and I believe he will, coming into a rematch with Fury.
yeah, and if we have to use a point of reference with Wilder, it has to be the Stubborn fights. The first fight, Wilder showed that he does have at least the capability of being a technical fighter when presented an opponent. And then you saw in the rematch, granted, yeah, this is the Bermain Stubborn, but he obliterated Stubborn. But it does show with the proper Wilder will improve on a fight and will actually try with Fury. It's going to be the situation where throughout the rematch, should he beat Luis Ortiz? Should he beat Luis Ortiz in a rematch? All he's going to hear in the lead up is, you really lost a fight. Fury won, Fury won, Fury won. That's going to piss him off, obviously. And that may add more motivation, but on Fury's sake, there's not much you can do. I personally think the fight's going to get pushed back because those two cuts look really, really bad. I'm still surprised in some ways that the commission didn't actually stop the fight because of how bad those cuts were. But at the end of the day, Fury now has to just sit and wait for 5 months at least to get the Wilder rematch, and he has to do a lot of improvement. I know he likes his coach that he has right now as far as teaching him, and he says he doesn't need to be taught anything, but yeah, he does. And hopefully he gets another voice in his corner that will actually tell him some of the things that he's doing wrong, rather than just hoping that he can just use the range against somebody like Wilder, who he knows can hurt him.
Indeed, and you
Question
and
for
I
you
both.
all. Sorry, Mike. If the shoe was on the other foot and it had been Wallin who had suffered that cut, would the fight have been stopped in the 5th round?
Gus, you shouldn't answer questions you already know the answer to.
Yeah, exactly.
All right,
Exactly.
You
rhetorical.
shouldn't ask
Yeah.
questions you already know the answer to. You and I both know that there was no hell well way they was going to stop that fight. Not with
Yeah,
all that's on the line. Fight is
yeah,
particularly from a financial perspective.
yeah, of course, yeah.
So
Because some,
that answers that. Let's move on to, like I said, I agree with you, Daniel, in terms of the fight being pushed back. I mean, was it 47 stitches? I just don't think there's any way that fight is going to happen in February, because that fight needs to, those dual cuts need to heal, not just outside, but also inside. And I just go by the adage of Sean O'Grady, who used to, former lightweight champion, who used to be the not play by play, but the fight commentator for USA Today fights back in the day. He has always said that fight that cuts need at least 3 months to heal, both on outside and inside. And those two, and Fury suffered 2 cuts that were pretty nasty. And so, yeah, I think that fight will be pushed back until maybe April, May. But
Mike,
I don't see it happening in February for sure.
just another quick follow-up question to you. I mean, has your motivation or your desire for the rematch, has that been slightly dampened as well now?
No, because as suspect, for lack of a better word, as Fury looked in that fight, I think in a rematch with Wilder, he will amp it up sufficiently. And because I think he will amp it up and rise to the occasion, I anticipate when the two get back into the ring, it will be a good fight because you you because Fury will amp it up, and because you will have to think that Wilder is going to improve based on those two factors alone. Um, it's going to be a pretty entertaining fight, and Fury probably has the mindset that he outboxed Wilder, only got a draw, that he's going to have to do something different, maybe be aggressive. I just think that personally, there's no way that this fight cannot be exciting, particularly if Wilder steps it up and improves.
Whack-ass Wilder against Fugazi Fury. Not even remotely, not even remotely interested in the rematch, personally.
The only reason I'm invested in it is that because I want Wilder to put Fury out, and then I don't have to listen to his stupid mouth anymore.
Yeah.
Well, the main aspect of it when it comes to the rematch to me, if anything that this fight did is it just it on the surface level, it raises Wilder's chances of actually winning for a bit. But I do agree in the sense that when Fury's presented with an actual opportunity, he does actually try. But I don't know how this is going to happen and this lead up when it comes to this fight because I think he's not going to be able to do any exercise for at least 2 to 3 months. And we kind of know what Tyson Fury becomes when he doesn't do anything for 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, like I said, I just think that I might have been on mute. My apologies. For me, shoot, Fury rises to the occasion the bigger the fight. That's just my perception. And I think Wilder, he's going to improve because he has to. You put that soup together. I expect a entertaining fight. That's just me.
Let's just hope my man Ortiz knocks his punk ass out, man.
I don't see it personally, Gus. I just don't see it. I don't see. Ortiz had his best chance in that 7th round. He didn't come out in the 8th with the same vigor. He let Wilder back into the fight. That was his best hope. That was his best hope.
Yeah, Wilder got massive help in that fight. Corruption was there, man. Nobody can dispute that.
Yeah. I'm gonna say corruption, but let's just say he was
that and the scorecards, Mark. Look at the scorecards as well.
A different referee, a different, a less lenient referee may have stepped in on that situation.
Mr. Heyman was busy with the infamous Vaseline and wire payments.
Let's move on to some other fights because you're gonna have to dip out on us early, Gus. I'm going to split the rest of these fights up. I'm going to directly to you to talk about this next fight. Devin Haney, who fought in the Little Garden Friday against a guy by the name of Abdullaev. Haney stopped Abdullaev, cornered and decided not to come out for round 4, I think it was. Haney broke his eye socket in the 3rd round with a beautiful right hand. You was mentioning Abdullaev to me in the chat, Gus, and you're based on you saying that Abdullaev could be sneaky tough. He proved not to be. Haney controlled this from jump. After the fight, Haney called out Loma, something that you don't see many of these lightweights doing or fighters below lightweight. Your thoughts on Haney in the aftermath of a really dominant win over a guy who you thought was sneaky tough?
Yeah, Abdullaev in the past had shown me that he had the ability to land certainly counters. Now he was landing with his jab, but he was just tailor-made for Haney because he was just operating in straight lines. So Haney was just able to control him with his jab pretty much and land, right hands. Couldn't really miss him, but there was not enough activity for me from Haney. And Abdullaev, his distress signals were clearly visible in the second round. He didn't really want to be there. So as a spectacle, it was a massively disappointing fight. But credit to Haney, he made a reasonably good well, I wouldn't even say reasonably, but he made an average fighter look almost like non-existent in the ring. Pretty much dominated him. So credit to him for that sense. Does have ability, speed, definitely has impeccable sort of speed ability. But the aftermath, Mike, is the real interesting aspect now. Some of the berating to Vasily Lomachenko and his path to undisputed is, to me, it's ridiculous, because on the one hand, I've got no problems with a young fighter calling out the number one in the division and trying to shoot his name and his career to that next level and targeting the number one. That's encouraging to see. We don't see enough of that, and we've criticized a number of fighters for avoiding Vasily, and we know the list is just beginning to accumulate with the Mikey Garcias and etc. and Gervonta Davis, who his promoter in the past, Floyd Mayweather, had explicitly stipulated that Tank Davis would not be engaging with Vasily. So all of that, and Devin Haney is even younger than what Tank Davis was at that point when he was the IBF champion. So it makes Davis look even more of an arsehole. But there's levels to boxing, Mike. Now, Devin Haney has just pretty much been fighting, respective journeymen, etc. The level of competition has not been spectacular, but he's a young fighter who's got a lot of time on his side as well. But I think the issue is weight, Mike. As I mentioned before, coming in the ring around 155 pounds and 5 feet, Mike, that's clearly a welterweight, Mike. So I think that's the modus operandi for the urgency, and certainly with Teofimo Lopez as well, because they know both of them cannot maintain weight at 135 pounds. And now with Devin Haney, he only had 1 month of ardent testing as well, Mike. So all these people talking about comprehensive and strict drug testing, it hasn't been evident in the past, and it certainly wasn't for this fight also, because you can just look at the registration dates that the WBC and VADA have. They have an audit trail for that. So weight is the issue. I don't know how long he's going to stay at 135 pounds, but I think better opposition, Mike, because if he goes into the ring with Vasily now, I think he comprehensively loses the fight. Vasily is not going to operate in straight lines with him. The ability he has to exploit those angles. And if you look at Devin Haney in the past, Mike, certainly with the Hank Lundy fight, although he's very good at evading punches now, but he doesn't like to get hit, and he doesn't react well when he's hit. That's what I've deduced in the past. I think he definitely has vulnerability, and his only punch resistance now, Mike, is his weight, because he's fighting against athletes who is much, much the bigger fighter as well. So he can absorb those punches, but it's kind of ironic, Vasily is in his third weight class and he's fighting fighters far bigger than him. But that's what all of these Vasily detractors want. They realize that his skill is so superior. Now weight is the only way that he can be tackled. So they're almost begging him to keep moving up weights once to try and neutralize his advantage he has in skill. And you could see parts of that with the Luke Campbell fight, fighting somebody sort of 5'10" with a reach as well. That and he was getting a little bit hit with the southpaw hand as well. So that's given all of these fighters a great deal of encouragement as well. You saw it with Teofimo that was barking, but when Teofimo also fought a guy who was weight bullying him, what happened to Teofimo? The critics came out and were criticizing him. So boxing can change fight by fight, Mike. The hype's a little bit with this young kid, but I don't think Vasily should be too concerned with him at the moment. He's he's got a career path that he's designated. The world knows he wants Rich Comey or Teofimo Lopez the chance to become undisputed. That has been disseminated through the boxing world for some time as well. So I admire, the direction he's doing in his third weight category. And then I think eventually his desire to go back down in weight makes sense, Mike, because he's only 5'5". Don't believe Boxwick, Mike. I've seen Vasily live twice, and I can tell you he's not 5'7". It's only 5'5". So, going back down in weight to me makes sense, So whether the fight happens with Devin Haney, I'm not sure. If it does at some point, fair enough. If it doesn't, I'm not too disappointed, Mike.
I'm going to you, Daniel, to talk about this next fight that took place on the undercard of Haney Abdullaev. Uh, Amanda Serrano fighting Heather Hardy for Hardy's featherweight title. Serrano dominated Daniel en route to a decision. It kind of spoke, this fight to me kind of spoke to past regular guest of Pound for Pound Box Report, Gail, who has often advocated women's boxing be 3 rounds as opposed 3 minutes a round as opposed to 2 minutes per round, because uh, if that first round, Daniel, would have been a full 3 minutes, Serrano might have stopped Hardy in that first round. Unfortunately, she didn't. Hardy kind of toughened up as the fight went along. She was losing clearly, but she survived and she went the distance. Thoughts on the fight, Daniel, and 2 additional questions. Your thoughts on the aftermath and the discussions about a fight between Serrano and Katie Taylor. Taylor, who it was announced is moving up to 140 pounds in her next fight. And Serrano had a comment about that today, saying she's going back to MMA as a result. So thoughts on that, and given what you saw, given what you've seen for Serrano in her career, and listen, I've been critical of her and accused her of essentially being a weight bully, but skill-wise, what she brings to the table, she's one hell of a fighter. I know you got Clarissa Shields out there. She calls herself the GOAT. I know you got Taylor out there. The belt's at 135 pounds. Should we start considering Amanda Serrano as maybe the true pound-for-pound women's top fighter in the world? Unmute your mic, Dan.
I wholeheartedly agree. Can you hear me now? Can you
Yeah, I
guys
can
hear
hear
me
you now.
now? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I completely agree in the sense of the fact that if that fight would have had 3 minutes gone past even round 2, because Serrano laid a number, had a Hardy true to her reputation, toughened up, and gave it the best, even though she was clearly, unfortunately, outclassed in this way. And it's an interesting dynamic when you look into this fight, because it's both a case for the 3-minute rounds and sometimes it's against it. Because you mentioned it, it probably would have been a great stoppage for Serrano, or a good feather in the cap, especially in the New York market, where it's a battle of New York, Puerto Ricans versus Irish, Italians. But we still have a little bit of this stigma, and I'll credit MMA for luckily some of the stigma, but a lot of people unfortunately still don't really like when women fight knockouts the way that Serrano looked like he was going to get the knockout if that round would have happened. So there's really not much to say when it came to the fight. Serrano won handily. Carter Hardy lived up to reputation, and like I said, and now to the other two questions, I don't want going back to MMA because at the weight classes going into it, if Katie Taylor is going to move up to 140, there's really not much fights out there money-wise that boxing offers that can equal what probably a halfway decent MMA paycheck would give out. Just ask Holly Holm. Holly Holm was decorated boxing champion. She eventually moved full-time MMA. Serrano might do the same if the financials are going into it. As far as the pound for pound, that one is difficult. Because you can say Clarissa doing what she did, it makes a case for it. You can still say based on experience and the fact that nobody has officially beaten her, you can still say Cecilia Brackes is still in that. Katie Taylor obviously is still in the come up, but Serrano's name is there. What makes this interesting is her name is at least now in the discussion.
Yeah, I forgot. I omitted Cecilia Brackes into this discussion. And yeah, my apologies for that. But yeah, continue on, Daniel.
On the Serrano sisters, particularly Amanda, because I've seen the skills up close of what she can do, and she is going to do what she can as far as winning. Like, there's a reason why it looked preposterous that she went down the weight the way she did, but at the same time, what do you expect to do? Because the only opponent that could probably make a decent payday decided to move up. And then the possibility after that is you have to go up 2 weight classes to possibly fight Cecilia Brackes, and who is probably Matchman is probably managing her career very carefully now. And so it's a pretty interesting dynamic, but Amanda Serrano's name luckily is in the discussion. Everything depends on how Cecilia ends her career, and particularly if Clarissa Shields has any missteps along the way, because out of all of them, taking Cecilia out of the equation, to me, Clarissa Shields technically has the stronger case out of all of them when it comes to pound for pound. Because yes, Katie Taylor is good, a little bit undisputed, did win the belts, but the competition really wasn't there. Whereas Clarissa Shields, she fought somebody that many people thought she couldn't beat, in Christina Hammer, and dominated her. So to me, Clarissa probably has the better claim, but Serrano suddenly has his name out there. Probably the weakest person out of the 3 is going to be Taylor to the claim, but number 1 still going to be Cecilia, unless she loses.
I go to you talk about these last few fights. I'm going to kind of combine multiple fights into one. I don't know if you attended this event, Jacob, at the place formerly that I still call the StubHub Center. You had Jaime Munguia defeat a guy by the name of Ollotey, stopped him. You had also on the undercard of that. No. Let me go back. I don't know if you saw this fight, but I forgot to mention this during the discussion about Fury. Quickly, Jacob, your thoughts on Navarrete, Emanuel Navarrete, defeating a Filipino by the name of Elorde in 4 rounds. If you saw the fight, your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it. Not much to report. I mean, Navarrete went through him like a buzzsaw. The guy, I mean, it's a talented kid. He's staying active. He jumped at the opportunity to fight on Mexican Independence Day on the undercard, and he's for real. I mean, he's just he uses his skills very well, and he basically just dusted up that guy, his opponent, pretty easily. There wasn't really, I wouldn't consider it a whole lot of competition from Elorde, but it's I think what they're talking about with Navarrete, I think, is the Ray Vargas fight, right? I believe that's the
Yeah,
fight that they're trying to
yeah.
make, and
I
I
don't know if
think,
this is true. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard through the tea leaves that Ray Vargas was in attendance, was in Vegas, and
yeah,
was in Aram's ear, saying that he wanted a fight with Navarrete. Have you heard anything about that?
I believe he was there, and yeah, I'm hearing that they're trying to make that fight. And especially because Roman is I think he's out right now due to injury, so it's a
What
definitely
fight was
make.
that, Jacob?
What's that?
What fight was that? Sorry.
Navarrete versus Ray Vargas.
Oh, okay. Okay. Carry on.
Yeah, because I know the talks were before was, Daniel Roman to fight, after he beat Haney, to unify the belts. The fight was Ray Vargas, Roman, but I think Roman got hurt. Ray Vargas came off of not a spectacular win, but a win in um, just recently. I was actually at that fight, but yeah, it looks like this is the fight that they're trying to make, and Golden Boy and Top Rank have been playing semi nice, and I think they have the Gonzalez and Stevenson fight coming up here, which is cross promotion. So, um, but I think Navarrete can beat Ray Vargas. I think Ray Vargas has a lot of deficiencies, and he's been pretty lucky to make it this far. But Navarrete is young, hungry, and he's just he's a force.
Agreed. Yeah.
Question for everybody here. Quick question: Did you would you con- Do you think Navarrete is the best in the world at 122 pounds?
Uh,
No,
ye-
I would probably regret that.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to say right now because he is one of the champions, but I'd like to, see him fight, you know, one of the other champions to basically prove it. But he definitely could be.
Your thoughts, Gus?
Um. Yeah. I think he's the best at I think he's the best at 122, Mike. But I think there's fighters at 118 that can come up and beat him at 122.
Mm.
Nearly
Neri's already beaten him, but I think
turn it up.
the French sort of Moroccan Bali is a very
Oh,
decent fighter. I think that's
oh,
Oh my god.
I think
oh.
Bali is better than him personally, Mike. I think he's a better technical fighter. The thing with Navarrete is that he's one of those fighters that just commits to his punches, even though he's sometimes looking down. So, but he has that sixth sense of landing it. His punch activity is very difficult. But I've seen him a lot earlier in Mexico, Mike, and I've seen fighters outbox him. He got one or two. He fought a guy called oh Oscar. What was it? Was it Oscar Martinez or whatever? It was an 8-round fight, and he was getting beaten up a little bit in that fight, Mike. So, but he's improving, Mike. He's 24. I give him that, and I like his work ethic and the fact that he's very active in the ring as well. I was starting to think that they were trying to pit his demise, but old Top Rank. But I back to your question, I think he's the best at 122. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to
Yeah,
Jacob in the
the
fight set. Go ahead, Daniel.
no, as I said, Roman's mainly because so he's a double champion, but on with the injury and Navarrete has come up out of surprise, like beating a game as a dog race and in ever successful fashion. So he has a case, but and I probably want to see him against Ray Vargas first.
Okay. Let's move on. I'm going back to you, Jacob. At the place formerly known as StubHub, I will still call it StubHub. I don't care. You had Jaime Munguia fight a guy by the name of Ollotey. Easy win. This was a setup, as far as I'm concerned, Jacob. Um, Munguia won, but I got nothing from it. Munguia has been criticized, particularly after his last bout, um, in which I felt he lost. Changed trainers with Eric Morales. His opponent was so inferior in a latte that you can't tell any significant improvement from Munguia, in my opinion. There's talk about him moving up to 160 pounds sooner than later. In judging him versus middleweights, be it Canelo, be it Triple G, be it Andrade, be it Charlo, I can't get no read how he would do based on what we saw Saturday night, because that was easy work from him for him. Your reaction to what you saw at the place formerly known as StubHub, Jacob?
aka Home Depot Center.
Yeah.
Um, you know what, Munguia? First of all, that fight wasn't a walk in the park for him. Elote was actually having pretty good success. Munguia likes to load up on his punches, and he was missing a lot in those beginning rounds. I know it only went 4 rounds, but at some point it seemed like Elote didn't even want to be there anymore. So that kind of made it difficult for him to I guess continue on with his game plan. But Munguia, I think Munguia is very. He's basically a fighter that maybe we gave too much hype to because of the way he came up, burst onto the scene against Ali. But since that fight, he hasn't looked that great. He had a tough fight with Smith. Inoue, he had a tough fight with. I definitely think he lost that Hogan fight. If it wasn't if it wasn't in Mexico, I think he would have not gotten the favorable majority decision card. But because it was in Mexico, a little bit of home cooking. But if this guy's thinking about moving up to middleweight, I think he's gonna get smoked. I think there's a lot of guys at middleweight that can basically counter and land punches off Munguia. He's a tough kid, but I just don't think that he just had a little bit too much hype too fast because of the Ali. Nobody really knew who he was. He wasn't like a well-known name, but the way he burst onto the scene with Ali, 4th round TKO, and the way he basically destroyed him, then everybody was like, oh, this is the next best, next guy, and and it's probably part of it probably has to do to Golden Boy too, because when one of their fighters does, or any promotion, when one of their fighters does good, of course they're going to be like, oh, he's the next up and coming guy, like this is the guy that we need to put our marbles behind. I think we said it on the previous podcast, or I know I did, but if Golden Boy wants to invest in somebody, it should be Ortiz. That guy. That guy I think has a lot of talent. Munguia, not I don't think has as much talent. I think he's a tough kid, but I think he's basically primed for getting knocked out. Because of his kind of reckless style and his he just kind of comes straight forward and tries to land big shots and he is a big guy. I mean he was way bigger than Ollotey. You could tell the size difference, but he's not that great of a super welterweight, so I don't think that um, he'd be that great of a middleweight.
I see your question. First of all, shout out to Quantum. Join us in the live YouTube chat. I see your question, Quantum. I'm going to ask the fellas here in the panel your question, but first I want to give Jacob your quick comments on French on Cruz Dezern. She was supposed to fight a mandatory against Alejandro Santiago. Santiago had to drop out because of weight issues. Last minute substitutes. She fought Marcelo Cornejo, who Dezern defeated last year by decision. So this was a rematch. Cruz Dezern, she ended up winning again, pretty wide margin as far as I'm concerned. If you saw the fight, your reaction to me, Jacob, Cruz Dezern, does she have the flashy skills that a Break Us, that a Clarissa Shields, that a Katie Taylor or a Serrano, who we talked about in depth earlier in the show? Does she has that? No, but I watch her, and to me, she has that it factor. One, she's going to be hard to beat at 168 pounds. She is strong as an ox, and she got a ramrod jab that pushes ladies back. If you can't move Dezern Cruz back and force her on the back foot, if you can't hurt her, it's going to be tough for her to beat. She's the only woman who I've seen force Clarissa Shields to fight backwards. And at that weight, I think she can do that to every woman in that division. And plus, she has that personality. She has a backstory. Her outfits is among the flashiest in all of women's boxing. So, does she have that flashy style? No. But does she have star potential in women's boxing? Yes. Your reaction to what you saw from her in the rematch win over Cornejo?
Yeah, I mean she had I think some really, I mean she definitely won the fight in my opinion. She had some really strong rounds. To speak on, she fought Shields, and lost and put up a, she's tough, but at the same time, uh, Clarissa Shields, I believe that was her debut. So I think Clarissa Shields.
It was both ladies' debut.
So yeah. So there you. So from that perspective, though, I think Clarissa Shields has grown from not only from her amateur days and winning 2 gold medals, back-to-back gold medals, but then also getting into the professional game and basically honing her skills and in going back to the earlier discussion that you guys were having. I think she is definitely on the women's side, the pound for pound best. I think she has the best claim to that. Not only because she has the wins, but she did beat Hammer pretty convincingly. And so, but to go back on Dezern, I think she definitely can do some things at this division. But the problem with the women's boxing, unfortunately, is that there's not a whole lot of competition like at certain weights. Um, so that I think that's their biggest hurdle, besides even the 3 minute rounds. One of their biggest hurdles is to be able to make the intriguing matchups at all these different weights, because there's the well isn't as deep there. It just isn't yet. I don't know if ever will be, but as women's boxing gets more traction, hopefully it does. Hopefully these divisions get a little bit deeper, but but she's definitely entertaining, and like you said, she has a good personality. So I'd like to see her again, but it was good performance from her.
I see Gail has joined us from Communities Digital News. Uh, she was at an event. For those who do not know, there was an announcement today that I think just finished. The announcement of Canelo Alvarez, Sergey Kovalev. For those who've been sleeping under a rock,
Boo.
Kovalev and Alvarez will fight November the 2nd. Gail was at the event, so I'm gonna bring her into the discussion. We are talking Cruz Dezern and the rematch versus her rematch win versus Cornejo. Your thoughts on Cruz Dezern and that win over Cornejo? And I don't know how much you've heard of the show, but if you want to talk about some other fights, please do.
Well, this is an experiment, folks. I am on the train southbound going back to San Diego. So, how's the mic sound?
Oh, we can hear you clearly.
Excellent. I was ringside for the Dezern Cornejo fight. Those two girls do not like each other. In case you didn't notice, they do not like each other. So it made for a fun fight, and they got thrust into the position of the co-main event due to all the crazy stuff that happened over the weekend with the Garcia Sparrow fight. And they stood up and they got some airtime. They got to show some women's boxing in the super middleweight division. Um, and Cruz Dezern did a good job. She is in the position of a lot of fighters that, while she did have a fairly good amateur career, she went through a stretch where she wasn't fighting. So as a pro, she has somewhat been learning on the job. But she's got a terrific trainer in Barry Hunter. She listens to him. He's given her great advice. She's a very powerful puncher. She's not particularly nimble, but she's a strong woman and she's learning how to turn her hands over on her punches. So she makes for a fan-friendly fighter to watch, both from that perspective as an athlete, and she's a very well-conditioned athlete, which helps her tremendously. But she's also wildly entertaining, and the woman is just one of these Renaissance people. Designs and sews her own boxing outfits and her own street clothing, mind you. College degree in or so she's a very impressive, fun woman. But I'll tell you what, lots of credit goes to Maricela Cornejo, who took the fight on days' notice when Franchon's original opponent couldn't get a visa to come into the United States from Mexico. So Cornejo was in the gym. He said, "You want a rematch?" She's the one that, took the title away. And she said, "Hell yes, I'll do it." So she did the best she could. She was in pretty good shape considering she had 2 days to prepare. And that says a lot about her character as well. And we'll welcome seeing both of them again.
Earlier we discussed Gail, Serrano, and Heather Hardy. We talked about how it kind of fell into the narrative that something, not the narrative, but something you've always preached is that there needs to be 3-minute rounds in women's boxing because if the first round in particular was 3 minutes, Serrano probably would have stopped Hardy. Your thoughts on the fight? Your thoughts on the talk afterwards about Serrano and Katie Taylor, with Taylor apparently moving up to 140 pounds to seek a title there, and Serrano reacted by saying, we had an agreement to fight. She's backing out of the agreement. I'm moving on to MMA. Your thoughts, Gail?
Those are the kind of fights that build an audience for women's boxing because they're very exciting. It was a beatdown of a fight. Serrano just took it to Hardy. And we can credit Hardy for her bravery and her determination in sticking to the fight. She decided she was going to end that fight on her feet no matter what. But you are right, Michael. That would have been a knockout in early rounds had there been the 3-minute rounds. And this discussion's going to continue about whether women should go to 3 minutes. Many of the pros want it. Many of the pros say we're never going to get pay equity if we don't fight equal lengths of time to the men. And there is a train of thought that we'd see a lot more knockouts in women's boxing if it went to 3-minute rounds. On the other hand, there are those who cite medical studies, and they do exist. Um, we don't know how reliable they are, but there are studies that claim women are more prone to concussion with the longer rounds, and 2 minutes is a protective measure. Well, I can hardly see how going 12 hard 2-minute rounds like Hardy did is any better than getting knocked out and stopped after 2 rounds of 3 minutes each. You tell me what is worse on her. Now, going forward, Serrano, I based on that performance and based on some of her last few performances, she's been getting stronger, and more important, she's been getting more confident. So anybody she chooses to take on, including the Katie Taylor, needs to take that very, very seriously. She has every chance of winning, even against a top opponent like Taylor. It's going to be interesting to see how these matches take place. And, going back to this whole issue of the 2-minute rounds, the pay equity, the safety, and so forth, then we end up in the position where, for the women, unlike the men, women combat sports athletes can make more money in MMA. They can. The men, no. The men are the male boxers at the top of their craft can make a lot more money in general in boxing. So you're going to lose some of the women's talents to MMA, but they need to make a living. I don't begrudge it. If it means that somebody says, listen, I said I was going to fight you, but I got an opportunity to make a better living for myself in MMA, I don't begrudge that. I really don't.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Going back to the question here that was asked in the chat by Quantum, and I would love your take on this as well, Gail. Earlier we talked about Devin Haney and his win over Abdullaev. Quantum in the live YouTube chat, he asked, he had a question to us, to the panel. Thoughts on a fight between Devin Haney and Luke Campbell. The question from Quantum is, who do you think will win? So I'll ask. So that's the question here to everybody in the panel. Devin Haney, given what we saw from him against Abdullaev and the talk of him calling out, him calling out Lomachenko against, how do you think he will feel? He will fare against a Luke Campbell who went the distance with Loma just a few weeks back?
Haney is showing some real talent, real skill. It's hard to keep in mind how young he is, and he's showing quantum leaps in improvement every fight. I think he'd be very dangerous for Luke Campbell. I really do. I think he'd be biting off a little more than he could chew right now with someone like a Lomachenko. Lomachenko's style is perfect to avoid the worst of what a Devin Haney would have to offer from a power perspective. I don't think Devin is skilled enough to unravel all the barriers that Lomachenko could put up at this point. Ask me that question 18 months from now, I might give you a different answer. But right now, I don't think he's ready for a fight like that. But, I admire a young guy who's ambitious enough to call someone out. But it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow.
Gus from Corruption in Boxing, who was on the show earlier, he responded to Quanta's question in the chat. He says that, let me read quote from him verbatim: good clash of styles, age, experience, and pedigree. He will give the edge to Cool Hand Luke. I'll pose the question to you, Jacob and Daniel. Thoughts on a fight between Devin Haney and Luke Campbell? Who you got?
I think, first of all, it would be a great fight. I think both guys, I think, will bring their respective talents to the table. Luke Campbell's a tough guy. He had some great moments in that Lomachenko fight. he got beaten, but I think he did buzz Lomachenko and hurt him and had some success in some pockets. And with Haney, with his hand speed and like Gail said, his improvements that he's made, I think it would be a fun fight. Right now, I'd probably favor Haney right now, mostly because of Haney's IQ and hand speed. I think that would give Campbell some problems. Um, but I wouldn't count Campbell out of that fight. I mean, he could definitely. It's a winnable fight for him. And just to speak on Haney himself, I think the reason that he's calling out Loma is because Loma has looked, human within his last few fights. Linares, he got knocked down, and it was a tough competition in that fight. Pedraza gave him a good fight, and a lot of people thought he was just going to blow through Pedraza. And then Campbell, he hurt him. I think he buzzed him a little bit, and he had some success in that fight too. So the Lomachenko that was untouchable, that was making guys quit, as I think his competition and the guys that are more his size have come into the picture. He's looked, spots where he is vulnerable. Like he doesn't look like he's unbeatable. So I think these young guys see that, and so they gives them hope to say, hey, if I can exploit those things and bring something to the table, then maybe I can win this fight.
Your thoughts, Daniel?
That is a very interesting matchup because Luke Campbell has shown that he's work caliber at lightweight. That he had against Linares and Lomachenko. I would probably agree with Jacob, though. I would give the edge to Haney right now. Not just because of hand speed and because of skill. It's mainly because, unfortunately, the other factor is when you watch the Campbell fight is he eventually does wear down if you stay on him consistently. And Haney's the type of fighter that will, with not only skill, but with combinations. And we know, like I mentioned, this fight, he just broke an eye socket. He does have a bit of pop. So I would probably side right now with Haney, but it's a good fight to have. It's not a foregone conclusion that Haney would win. Luke Campbell can pull it off. And it would be a good test for it on it because, let's face it, politically, there's no way Haney right now is going to be anywhere near Loma.
Again, I want to thank Quantum for the question. Make sure to hit that like button, sir. Thanks for listening to us live. Because there's no real fights that are real noteworthy this weekend, I want to introduce kind of a new segment here, kind of a retrospective segment. This show is being recorded September 18th, which happens to be the 20th year anniversary of maybe the last super fight outside of the heavyweight division, and that is Oscar De La Hoya, Felix Trinidad welterweight unification showdown. Took place September 18th, 1999. And what I want to do during this particular time is kind of give a look back on the 20th year anniversary of that fight. Want to start the discussion with you, Gail. Being out there on the West Coast, for those who are too young to know, Felix Trinidad, Oscar De La Hoya, Tito versus Golden Boy, huge fight at the time. De La Hoya, WBC champion at 147 pounds, was hailed as kind of the it guy, the superstar, had won titles at 130, 135, 140, moved up to 147, seeking a fight against Trinidad, who at the time, long reigning IBF champion for 6 years, had made 15, 16 title defenses. This was the it fight. You had Lennox Lewis and Holyfield fight earlier that year in March, but to boxing fans, real boxing fans, this fight between De La Hoya and Trinidad, the build had been for 2+ years ever since De La Hoya defeated Whitaker in '97 to win the WBC title at welterweight. Shoot, even before then, even going back to the Chavez fight in 1996, people have been talking about this potential matchup. Being out there on the West Coast, Gail, the fight was, and you too, Jacob, the fight was tremendous, particularly in the Southwest, as it was all over the country, but particularly in the Southwest was where Golden Boy was the guy. Um, those years later, talk about the build up for it, the press tour, which was tremendous, particularly in LA. 20 years later, your thoughts on the fight, well, your thoughts on the events leading up, building up to that super fight in 1999. Can you hear us, Gail? I don't think
Well,
she's there.
us who
Oh, there she is. There. Go ahead.
watch you hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah. Yeah.
So I apologize. People, you have to remember, 20 years ago, it's hard for those looking at Oscar De La Hoya, the former great, the Olympic gold medalist today. That he was Ring Magazine's #1 pound for pound fighter when this fight took place. Um, and 3 of the top 5 pound for pound guys, arguably at that time, were in
Oh, wait, wait a minute, Gail. I disagree with that. #1 pound for pound fighter. Not as long as Roy Jones was around.
Well, right, but I'm not saying
he was a cash cow.
Add their #1. So yeah, we could argue about that. He was undefeated at the time. Some tremendous victories, under his belt, including Pernell Whitaker, including Chavez Sr. Yeah, and Ring had him above Roy Jones. We can now in retrospect look back and say, well, what the hell you were thinking? But that was the truth at the time. So here we've got a fight made with Trinidad, fight the millennium, and we're all coming down to, 2K. We thought the whole world was going to fall apart. Remember that? Computers were going to shut the world down. We've got Trinidad, who is undefeated, Oscar, undefeated, pound for pound supremacy online, and it was a unification fight to, it's hard to put yourself back in that position. We've certainly seen those always on the line, and this is one of those. But in the media landscape and the sports landscape 20 years ago, boxing was still much more a mainstream sport. So this was, on the level of a Super Bowl as far as hype, recognition. The general audience, not just the boxing audience, was all in on this. It was a big, big deal. And it turned out to be a highly competitive fight, a highly controversial decision in some people's minds, razor thin. I mean, a fight doesn't get closer on the scorecards and yet render a decision. I mean, it's 1 point away essentially from being a draw when you have a majority decision, because the scores were 1 card a draw, 14, 114, 1 card at 115, 113, and 1 card at 115, 114. That's a razor thin decision. So people are going to talk about this for the rest of boxing history. At this point, it was such high stakes, it was such high drama, and 15 years later, both guys end up in the Boxing Hall of Fame, and rightfully so. It broke pay-per-view sales records at the time. It generated at the time record box office, record revenue, and the record was held for 8 more years. And the fight that broke it was when De La Hoya fought Floyd Mayweather. And it's since been eclipsed, but it set a lot of monetary box office and viewing records at the time too. I mean, we really can't imagine much bigger of a fight unless it was one in the heavyweight division, one of the great heavyweight title fights, and it's very difficult for guys in the smaller weight divisions to achieve that. But Oscar did it, Mayweather did it, Pacquiao has done it. Very few others. You could really count them on one hand, which is impressive.
How big was the fight? And I'll go to you, Jacob. It's the last paper. It's the last pay-per-view bout that I've ever shelled out money for. I haven't paid for a pay-per-view fight since.
Now that's saying something.
Hey, don't say too much, man. The FBI is gonna be coming down, knocking down your door.
How big was the fight? It wasn't just mentioned on mainstream outlets like ESPN. Pre-fight coverage was on CNN. Pre-fight coverage of this bout was on CNN. Held at the venue of the fight. Um, um, was it MGM Grand or Mandalay? Mandalay, I think. The weigh-in, it was a full house. You don't get that nowadays. The build-up was tremendous. Yet, I have to be honest here, Jacob. As much hype as the fight got, can it be argued that what we saw in the ring didn't live up to that hype? Because if we're going to be honest here, it didn't turn out to be the great fight we all anticipated coming in.
I mean, you can make that argument. I mean, it's rare that a fight lives up to its hype.
I mean, I say that because what was the comparison coming in? Leonard Hearns won. We didn't get that.
Right, but again, I think it was again a very contrasting. Styles make fights, so this is one of those things where I think you had Oscar De La Hoya, who, gold medal winner, who had kind of the boxing, jab, jab dominant style, versus the vicious hooking power and come forward fighter, and also a fighter that in Felix Trinidad that used to get stronger as the fight wore on. He was a slow starter, but as the fight would wear on, he would eventually get to his guy. And so oddly enough, on my website, this was I did have a series I was doing. I was going back to look at fights that were closely contested or maybe controversial, and this was the first one on that series. I've myself had Oscar winning the fight 116 to 112. I thought he had built up an early lead, and I do remember that when after I saw this fight, HBO did a rebroadcast, and they did something that I don't remember I've seen previous to this. But what they did is after every round, they showed the judges' scorecards to basically kind of lead up to like how they got their final score. And I remember being baffled by some of the judges giving Tito some early rounds, because I didn't think I felt like he didn't even like land a punch in a particular round, or he wasn't at that effective. He definitely came on later in the fight, but again, a fight isn't judged on at the end and to say like, oh, who do we think won the fight? It's judged round per round. So I think that's why there was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of rounds I think that were given to Tito early on that I think were clear Oscar rounds. But it was still a really good fight. It was still an entertaining fight. There was a lot of drama in the fight. I think maybe one of the biggest tragedies of this fight was that there was never the rematch. I think the rematch could have done huge numbers. I think it would have been just as highly anticipated, but it just never came to fruition. Tito would go on to have, big fights, later on, most notably his performance against Fernando Vargas, another Mexican fighter, which was, a big blockbuster or a matchup, back then. But it's crazy to look back, at this fight, and just reflect on it after this many years have gone by. But again, I think it'll be talked about for many years to come. Did it live up to the fight of, like, hey, this is the fight of the millennium? I think as it was on the poster, no. But rarely do fights, typically when they build up fights, like, oh, this is going to be the fight of millennium or the fight of the decade or whatever, rarely do they live up to that. It's typically the fights where you get two guys that are maybe not as well known, or not as high profile names, that kind of just leave it all out in the ring. Things that come to mind are like, Gotti, Ward, Barrera, Morales, even the Holyfield Bowe fights, as far as like heavyweight fights. I mean, to me, those are some of the greatest fights that happened. But it's still a very good fight, I think.
Another testament to how big this fight was, as well as Gail's earlier commentary about how boxing at the time was much more mainstream. I mentioned not just the fact that this fight received coverage on CNN, including the weigh-in. The press tour was covered live on ESPN in LA and in New York, Daniel. I remember clearly watching this on television. They broke in and aired the press tour in full. That speaks to, you didn't get that for Bo Holyfield 1. Not Bo Holyfield 1, but Lennox Lewis and Holyfield, their first fight, which took place the previous year. You didn't get that during the second fight. So that speaks to the magnitude of the fight that time. Your thoughts on the build-up, Daniel, your thoughts on the fight itself, and to Jacob's last point, your thoughts on the disappointment that we never saw a rematch.
I was a sophomore in high school when this happened in Miami. And this is at a time when Miami was still mostly dominated by the Cubans as far as the Latino population. And it was big among the Cubans. That should tell you something. Because anybody that's lived in Miami knows that Cubans in Miami only care about two things: Castro and baseball. That's it. And for them to get an attention over a fight between the Mexican and the Puerto Rican, that speaks volumes. And the build up to this fight, looking back, it was huge. It was as an heir to some of the fights that you saw with the Four Kings in the 80s, in a way, as far as the build up and how they could match up against each other. And I remember reading back, looking at it, interesting enough, in deployment in 2002, because luckily my ship, the USS Hopper, had an old copy of the Ring magazine hanging around. And one day I decided to read it, and it had that fight. You saw the coverage of it. You saw how big it was. You saw the comparisons. And the build-up to it was so tremendous, because we haven't had, up to that point, a real major Mexico versus Puerto Rico fight in that scale in a while time. And we have to remember also, this is at a time where Oscar was really, really questioned as far as like his identity as a Mexican American, as a
That's a
Latino
good
American.
point. That's
Yeah,
a good point.
that's a good thing. People have to remember when you look at Oscar De La Hoya's career, look at how the local papers covered him. Look how people in his local neighborhood talked about him from 1992, and then look how they talk about him in 1995 and 1996. It's a complete reversal. He was celebrated in this neighborhood in 1992. He was the hero. People called him a fake Mexican around the time of 1995 and 1996 because of how he marketed himself. And Tito's coming in, this young kid from Puerto Rico, real flashy, has a great record, and he's seen as more of that Latino icon that you can gear towards against somebody that, like I said, that didn't have that strong identity within his own neighborhood, within his own hometown in that way. So that's what made the buildup very, very interesting for this fight. Now, as far as the fight itself, I get how people thought this was going to be Leonard Hearns one. Also, how some people thought it was going to be Hagler Hearns one, round one. But this was the fight that was fought at a technical level that is not really appreciated in many ways. And I get why. You mentioned it yourself, Mike. The buildup was so great, and then the way the fight had turned out, you felt a bit disappointed because of what the hype became. But looking back at the fight, it was a good technical fight throughout, and it's one of those, and it's going to be one of those markers, those what ifs, particularly in the 12th round, when I guess Oscar's corner really thought they had the fight running away, and Oscar essentially retreated in those last 12, maybe last 11, 12. And ultimately, that led to a majority decision by Trinidad, the first real blemish in Oscar's career. And that's probably the main key disappointment into the fight, that whole aspect to it. You didn't see like Oscar gave it his all at the end of the fight because he was thinking more of as a tactician.
How much blame did you give to Oscar's corner for basically telling him to let the foot off the gas in those last few rounds?
Oh yeah, no, they had to take a considerable amount of the blame. They had to take a considerable amount of the blame because as much as Oscar was winning early on those rounds, Tito made adjustments. It wasn't adjustments that made you think he's gonna knock Oscar out, but it was adjustments. So his corner probably thinking, okay, Vegas, you're in a car-free fight. Ultimately, thinking that you have a hometown advantage, you a little bit. So ultimately, yeah, that corner really, really cost him a fight. Really, really cost him a fight.
You don't
Trinidad
think
went
that,
from.
you
Go
don't
ahead.
think though that I mean I place blame on Oscar more than I do on his team because for two reasons. One, he's the one that's in the ring, and whether his corner is telling him he has the fight in the bag, you know, to me as a fighter, you shouldn't assume those things, and you should still execute your game plan and not just rely on you to get the win because you built up some early lead. A fight is, in that time it's 12 rounds. That's the fight. It doesn't end after the 6th round unless you knock them out, and it doesn't begin at the 6th round before Tito. So there's that thing. And then also, as much as his image was, where Oscar was the pretty boy, and like you were saying, like he wasn't. Yeah, he had gotten kind of a lot of flack. He wasn't doing himself any favors by retreating in those final rounds, because that just it almost shows you like, oh, like he's scared to get knocked out, or he's scared to engage. It would have been better for him, I think. I think people would show a lot more respect for not people that win, but the people that at least try to still fight while the fight's still happening, not just coast on a what you think is a lead, and then basically dance around or run around for the remainder of the fight. I mean, people pay to see a fight, not someone fight for whatever, maybe 3/4 of the fight and then just give it away.
And to your point, Jacob, Quantum in the chat, he co-signs what you just said. He said that Oscar has no one to blame for himself, but himself for his reduced activity. That's one thing. And you have to put this up against the backdrop of what Oscar did to Ike Quartey 2 fights prior to this, where the fight was up in the air and Oscar charged out for the last round, fought with vigor, fought with passion, hurt Oscar, almost knocked him out. That Oscar in the final round that we saw against Quartey shrunk, in the opinion, in the minds of many. He shrunk during that occasion against Tito. So, your thoughts on that?
Yeah.
You're back, Daniel.
Okay, could you say that again? It broke off a little bit.
I say that one, Quantum in the chat, he kind of piggybacked what Jacob just said about the emphasis being on Oscar. He said in the chat that Oscar has no one to blame but himself for his reduced activity. And when you consider what Oscar did in the Ike Quartey fight, 2 fights previous to that, in which it was also a unification bout. The fight was in the air, up in the air, going into the last round, and Oscar he seized the moment, charged after Quartey, knocked him down, hurt him badly. That Oscar that we saw fight with intensity, fought with vigor, fought with passion, fought as if everything was on the line. You just didn't see it in that last moments with Trinidad, and the argument could be made that at the biggest moment in his career, Oscar shrunk. Your reaction, Daniel?
I can see that argument completely, because it's not of it. Yeah, sometimes you have to listen to your own instincts and know that this fight could be a little bit close. This fight could, and you have to seize the moment. So, yeah, a lot of blame has to be put on Oscar, particularly and I gotta thank Quanta for that. I forgot about that Quartey fight. So there is a lot of blame you can put it on Oscar, but at the same, yes, you at the fighter is the end when it comes to the situations. A lot of times, though, you still have your corner is there, not just to make sure that like your bumps your swells get taken down, your cuts get treated. They're technically your war counsel in between rounds. They're your eyes and ears to things that are happening outside of the ring that may not play that you may not notice when. So there's a lot of blame to. The main thing with Oscar is going to be this is going to be one of those regrets that had I turned it on, yeah, I probably would still been undefeated. And the ultimate disappointment, because that's the part I forgot to mention. Yeah, the disappointment probably at not having a rematch actually plays a factor into me into how Tito moved his career. Because we have to remember, Oscar move around past welterweight that often afterwards. While Tito went straight, shot out to middleweight. Shot to middleweight as soon as he could, and ultimately, unfortunately, he suffered
Well,
that
it
loss
wasn't the
against
fact that
Bernard
he just
Hopkins.
it wasn't just the fact that he shot at the middleweight. There was an opportunity there. Oscar decided to stay at 147 pounds, fight Gotti for some reason. That made no sense. Then he moved up to 54 to fight, I forgot the Spanish champion, Campillo, I think his name was. Correct me if the name is wrong. But Trinidad stayed. He moved up to 54, and he stayed there the following year fighting Reed and Vargas. Why didn't Oscar pull the trigger and say, if he was that outraged, why did he pull the trigger and say, get this guy back in the ring immediately? Because even though he lost, he was still A side in terms of money making. He's still the cash cow. He could have dictated the
Now,
rematch could have happened, and it never did. I don't understand why it never did, because
uh,
he could have made that fight anytime he wanted to.
well, a lot of it probably is a bitter taste in people's mouths. And you could actually see it right now happening today. But in many ways, I can look at Gennady Golovkin in a similar situation where Gennady feels he won those fights against Canelo, and there's a sizable population that agree with him, and that stays sometimes with a fighter. That maybe is what stays with Oscar. He feels he won the fight. Give Tito the satisfaction of a rematch when I clearly won the fight. That may be one of the factors. Another factor as well is we have to remember who was actually promoting these two at the time. Even though they broke bread once, it's very rare that Bob Arum and Don King broke bread. So there's a lot of those factors, and it's one of those missed opportunities. This could have been a trilogy. This could have been what ultimately, to me, Morales Barrera became. Not so much in the style of the fight, but in the tenacity and how close it was. Because think about it, when I make the comparison to Morales and Barrera, any one of those three fights, you can make a case that the other guy won. Happening with Oscar and Tito, but that's always going to be one of those what ifs. That's always going to be one of those what ifs in that scenario. And we have to admit, at the end of the day, it's going to be one of those lasting effects, and it does set, unfortunately, a precedent in the sport where if a fight's big and if a result isn't exactly what people wanted, you might not even get a rematch, even though the fight warranted it.
Going to you, Jacob, kind of your last word on this fight, 20th year anniversary of De La Hoya, Trinidad, all these years later. Your thoughts on the fight now?
I mean, it's still, to me, it's maybe it's because of my age. It's still a very memorable fight to me. It's a fight that I've revisited many times. Of course, there's the I think even though it didn't live up to the hype, I still think it's a good fight. It was entertaining to me, um, and it showed basically one of my favorite things about boxing is when two fighters fight at the height of their powers, which in this day and age doesn't happen very often, where you get two guys that are undefeated that have belts and that are unifying and put on a fight when they're not at the end of their careers, or not someone that's on the end of the career and the other one's at the beginning of their career, so to speak. So it has that allure to it. And I just being a fan from a young age, these are some of the fights that I'll probably never forget. Um, so I have a bunch of fights on DVD and whatnot, and I pull them out quite often, and you know even though it didn't live, like you were saying before, it didn't live up to the hype and the event that it was. In a way, it did change boxing in a lot of ways, because it was a big money fight at a lower weight. Prior to that, I think most of the records were at the heavier division. So what Oscar was able to do with his career to transition from being a gold medal winner, and he wasn't the first gold medal winner, but he was able to do that and transition into being a huge pay-per-view draw, not just for the Mexican market, but the American market, and then also at that weight, which wasn't very common, as it might be, as people might think. And basically, I think it's what Floyd ended up learning from, in the sense of studying what how to market a fight. And basically, when he fought De La Hoya, he kind of took over that mantle, and then he started having the biggest pay-per-view fights and biggest gates and things of that nature. So he's been able to transition that into that business sense, um, that Oscar kind of, in a way, not created, but he was involved with many of the people that were with his career, but he was able to change boxing in that way by putting these welterweights more towards the top. And then now, I think the welterweight division is considered a prestigious division. Um, Previously, maybe it wasn't as prestigious. A lot. I think, especially with the American fan base, heavyweights was always kind of like the division. But I think with my watching boxing, I've become more intrigued by the lower weights, by their skills and everything they bring to the table, than I am with the heavyweight. So I think this has had a hand in that, and these type of fighters fighting each other at the time that they did.
Seminal moment, significant fight, at a very important time, um, in the sport. Uh, Two fighters at their peak in their physical primes, fighting each other. Whoa, what a novel concept in boxing today. Um, when you look at how the Mexican American market, how the Southwest market, of the United States, the reason that in many ways it is carrying the sport in 2019 is because of the seeds that is because of what Oscar De La Hoya did in the decades of the 90s and the early 2000s. For that alone, that speaks to what an important figure he is. Uh, Conversely, when you look at the influence of the overall Latin American market, not just the Mexican Southwest, but the Hispanic market in the Southwest, Latino market in Florida and New York. Trinidad certainly plays a role into that as well. Um, this fight, the win, made him arguably the most important figure in all of Puerto Rican boxing. Um, when you look south of the heavyweight division, this is one of the most important fights below that in the history of the sport. But in spite of all that it brought to the sport, the money, how figures like Floyd Mayweather and even Anthony Joshua have benefited from the path that De La Hoya and Trinidad paved. Um, to Daniel's point, there still remains a big question of what if. What if Oscar would have went for the gusto in the last 3 rounds instead of letting off the gas? What if they would have fought again? What if the fight overall would have lived up to the hype? Would it even be even more massive today than it was 20 years ago? Will we remember in a better context, in a better light than we do now? Because when people look back at it, as significant as it was, particularly people who were of age and alive and well at that time who remember it clearly, you have almost as many folks who were disappointed because of the fight itself as they are praising the lead up and the build up and the ramifications afterwards from a financial perspective. So it's a important moment in the sport. It's a great moment in the sport in many ways, but in some ways it's it's a big disappointment. So there are pluses and minuses. There are benefits and kind of there's a benefit on the one hand and there's a disappointment on the other hand. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for me, um, the fight was needed. It was a fight and an event that was a must-have. It happened, unlike so many big fights today that we do just are not seeing. Um, the good outweighs the bad overall, and because of that, that's why I chose to have this kind of new piece, this kind of retrospective segment that I want to bring to the show because in spite of what people make the detractors of the fight itself, um, it's still a moment. It's still big time, and it still needs to be discussed and put in its proper light. It was huge. It was huge, and yeah, it was huge. It was huge. It was a much needed thing for boxing, and the sport would not be the same. The sport would not be the same if we did not see that fight. If that fight didn't happen, it just wouldn't be the same. Go ahead.
I wanted to make a point right to what I was mentioning before because unfortunately I got a phone call. That's why I dropped off. Make to the point that maybe Oscar legitimately feels that like he shouldn't give like he time the like the after satisfaction and knowing that the fight that he won because I noticed this morning what there was a Retro the Zone Twitter page when it came to Oscar's fights. They didn't go for the Trinidad fight. They went for the Fernando Vargas fight. Think about that for a minute. Maybe
That's BS on their part.
Yeah.
Well, he won that fight decisively. He won that fight decisively, though. So I mean, it's
yeah. But that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Maybe Oscar, even to this day, deep down feels UT. He won the fight. Everybody knows that winning your record is false, and I'm still holding a grudge from that. because I just remember looking at that
But who
and
does he
when
think?
like,
He,
isn't today Oscar
but
again?
who does he think he's fooling? Who does he think he's fooling?
People that probably have never
Everybody
paid
knows
attention
what
to other than their own.
people who are boxing fans of a certain day, age, they know what this day represents. And people who have a halfway sense of history, they know what's the more important and more significant fight.
Oh no, we know that. Like among us three and among people that are listening, we know that. But that message wasn't catered to those fans. That message is catered to casual fans who may be happening just now getting into the sport because of guys like Canelo, guys like Joshua, or any Ruiz now. People that don't look back into their history until they have the time.
I guess, but for the people in the know, it's disingenuous. It really is. One more story before we decide to shut things down. Um,
Hey,
we've talked about Ryan Garcia, young upstart on the Golden Boy camp. He, as these millennials like to do, took to Twitter to express some grievances that he has had with Golden Boy. He was scheduled to have a fight. It got canceled due to the opponent and some shenanigans on their part. Um, Garcia went to Twitter expressed that he's unhappy with Golden Boy. Well, today it was announced that they've come that they've mended fences, Jacob, and that Garcia has agreed to a new deal with Golden Boy. I think it's a multi-million-dollar deal now. I have my questions about why you giving this 20-year-old kid a multi-million-dollar deal. I mean, what the heck has he done? But overall, your thoughts about the little spat that he had, the fact that he's going to Twitter and saying this and that to me he's getting a little bit too big for his britches. I mean, what has he done? What has he done?
Jack shit. He's done nothing. Again, this is, and not to offend all the millennials that may be listening, but this entitlement, that this thing that I don't have to work for anything, you give it to me, is, I think, very prevalent in the younger generation. And he hasn't. It's not like, from one angle, I know what he's saying is that he's saying, oh, I'm bringing I'm bringing people to my cards. People want to see me fight. So I'm bringing the crowd, so I'm deserved X amount of dollars, or I'm deserved this deal. But here let's look at it from a different angle. When fighters sign with promotion companies, they nobody knows who the hell they are most of the time. And so they're given the platform where they can perform. And with them making the deal with the Zone because of Canelo, he's able to fight on that platform, to a much larger audience than ever since, because HBO went defunct. So he's getting opportunity, and on top of that, he got introduced, I'm sure, to Canelo trainer Reynoso, so he got that advantage though too. But again, the kid hasn't done anything. He hasn't accomplished anything. He's not a champion. He's not even. I wouldn't even rank him as one of the top guys. I actually think he's a knockout waiting to happen. I think once he fights somebody worth something, he's gonna be in for a rude awakening. And so I think it's a bad move by De La Hoya, as our Golden Boy in general, to basically cave into this kid's demands, because I think it's going to backfire on them. If I was them, I would be putting more money, like I said, to Ortiz, or maybe some of their other prospects that they have. Um, you know, Instead of wasting their money on this kid, because again, he's not proven yet to me, and I don't think that he deserves this praise that he thinks he has, or that he has earned. But it's in a weird way though, because they aired out all their dirty laundry, to the public. Even though he got a deal, I mean, there's obviously some big animosity there, and I don't think that's going to erase because of a deal. It's almost like I would equate it to if I was working somewhere and I had asked, for a review and a raise, and they didn't give it to me, and then I say, oh well, maybe 2 weeks later I end up finding another job, I'm going to quit, and they say, oh well, we'll give you what you want. I'm just like, okay, well, what happened to you when I was asking for it before? So like when you make that deal, it's a lot of the times that doesn't change. That doesn't change what happened previously. So I could see a situation where Garcia eventually leaves Golden Boy, or even worse situation, he starts losing and gets knocked out or whatever, and he doesn't become that high commodity anymore, because he's only going to be a commodity if he's winning. If he's losing and he's getting knocked out or he can't compete at a high level, then he's not going to be any good to Golden Boy except for like a stepping stone. But I don't know. I don't really care about the kid, so I mean, it's a stupid situation. So I mean, I hope he fights somebody good and he gets his ass kicked and gets humbled.
Um, uh, One comment before I go to Daniel and Quantum in terms of the last discussion we had about 20th year anniversary of De La Hoya Trinidad. He says that um, he wished the fight would have been a rematch would have happened. Quantum says that he believes that a rematch it would have been the rematch would have been a better fight than the first than a rematch between the two would have been a better fight. So he agreed with me. He wished that a rematch would have happened between De La Hoya and Trinidad. I go back to you, Daniel. We're gonna shut the show down talking about Ryan Garcia here. The spat that he's had with De La Hoya, him doing what millennials do, running to social media to express their grievances, and the deal that Oscar announced today with Ryan Garcia, announcing a new deal, multi-million dollars. And my thing is, if they want to mend fences, okay, but Oscar, why are you capitulating to a kid that has done nothing really? One, two, multi-million dollar deal for a kid who's done nothing? Really?
You want the easy answer to this, right? You want the easy answer, right?
I mean, if you want to go there, go there.
Yeah, let's just go there. This isn't about Ryan Garcia. This is about throwing olive branches at Canelo, because Ryan Garcia is now in Canelo's camp. So, if you're a promoter and you've just had a press conference announcing a big fight, and your star commodity, pretty much the commodity that you've had pretty much for almost this entire decade that you've been cultivating, suddenly just says the only relationship you guys have is at work. And then when you talk about the fight that he probably wanted, which is like a Golovkin fight, and we know, like I said, I'm not going to say the quote. I'm going to say that for Gail and then for her article. But the quote that Canelo said afterwards, yeah, you're going to throw as many fig leaves as you can from a business perspective. But I think they know real well who their horse is. They know they're going to position themselves with Virgil Ortiz, because they're already putting him through tougher tests than Ryan Garcia.
And he is the best fight. He is the best young prospect on Golden Boy's stable. I'm just saying.
Yep. No. There's little disagreement there. The main thing, unfortunately, is it doesn't matter. Like the skills wise, is who you run with, unfortunately, and this is the case where who Ryan Garcia runs with is benefiting him, and this is going to be used by Canelo as a bargaining chip for when he has that confrontation with Oscar, probably most likely after the Kovalev fight. and saying you have to make it really, 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 really beneficial for me to stay because I'm a big enough name now where I don't need you anymore.
Yeah, just check the Forbes
And
list.
yep, yep. Just check the Forbes list, and that's the unfortunate game that they put themselves in. And it does happen all the time. Like it does happen all the time, and in all sports. Like I have to unfortunately mention the 2014 NBA draft, where the Miami Heat took Shabazz Napier just on the assumption that LeBron James liked them, and maybe that would have influenced LeBron into staying when everybody pretty much knew he was heading back to Cleveland. That's the situation that Oscar faces right now. But the good thing about, luckily, when it comes to Oscar is, yeah, not a lot of his fighters have big enough names. Not a lot of his fighters have big enough fan bases outside of Southern California. But he does have a very, very deep stable where he can start cultivating these guys a lot more organically than some other promotions have. I don't think Top Rank's in that position yet with some of their young fighters. We know the PBC isn't exactly listed depending on the weight class with one of those fighters. And overseas, everybody's playing the country game. So that's the game that they're playing. I'm like, good on Ryan Garcia. He got his money. He getting paid. But hopefully he knows it's not because of his skill. Hopefully he knows that it's only because he's a bargaining chip at a bigger chessboard.
So ultimately for you, Daniel, is, yeah, okay, he's kind of catering to Garcia, but it's ultimately about a certain redhead who's moving up to fight one Sergey Kovalev in November. Got it. And I think we're going to start to end the we're going to end the show on that note. Want to thank Gus from Corruption in Boxing, who joined us earlier on the show. If you want to find out information about him, just go to YouTube, look for Corruption in Boxing. CORRUPTION Boxing. You can check out his work, talking boxing. He also does music reviews. I also want to thank Gail from Communities Digital News. If you want to check her out talking the sweet science, if you want to check her out talking media, because she does teach media. You can check her out on Twitter, PR Pro San Diego. You can check her out there on Twitter, PR Pro San Diego. Going to Jacob from Jab Hook, and also semi-regular on the Wrong Real podcast. If you want to, for those who want to talk the sweet science, for those who want to talk movies, let the folks know where they can find you.
Yeah, I could be found at Twitter, JRATM23. You want to talk boxing or movies, and yeah, check out. I've been guest on a few different movie podcasts. I usually tweet about it when I'm on the shows. Even when I'm not on the shows, I tweet about it. Or you can catch me if you guys go to any local fights in the LA area. I'm going to be going to the Spence Porter fight, so I'll be there and I'll be in the house and reporting live. So yeah, check me out.
Going to Daniel from the Inscriber, for those who want to talk the sweet science, for those who want to talk the NBA, especially when it comes to the Miami Heat. I know they're getting ready to start training camp within the next couple of weeks. Let the folks know where they can find you.
Yes, folks, you can find me on Twitter, Ruckus99. I think hopefully I'm going to get the podcast started again with the folks at Full Boxing News, hopefully this weekend or next couple of days. And definitely pay attention because, yeah, September's kind of low, but this calendar is starting to fill up with fights that are big in nature, big in importance, and as we mentioned today, just big in the whole spectacle of it all.
And for those who want to talk the the sweet science for those who want to talk boxing, music, fitness. You know what it is on Twitter, Brother JR at Brother JR76. I'll repeat what I said at the beginning of the show. If you want to find out all things regarding Pound for Pound Box Report, the blog page is the place to go to, p4pboxreport.wordpress.com. That is the link. Check the top right hand portion of the blog page to find links to where to follow us on social media, where to follow us on all platforms that carry RSS feed, the Cash Me, PayPal, donation links. Also, the links to my fitness page. I am an online coach for beachbody.com. Uh, if you're interested in any of the fitness challenges, I took some time off this month because, like I said, I'm just coming back from vacation. Going to start it up again in October. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Daniel and Gail, if you're listening, let's build together challenge, October Fitness Challenge. If you're interested, just hit the Pound for Pound Box Report blog page and check out my fitness link, and get in contact with me in that way. On the next episode, since there was no real fights that I really want to talk about that was that important, next week is going to be largely a preview show, as we're going to preview the upcoming welterweight unification showdown between IBF champion Errol Spence, WBC champion Sean Porter. On the undercard of Spence Porter, Anthony Durrell is going to fight David Benavidez, super middleweight contest for Durrell's WBC super middleweight title. I think he's going to lose that belt. I'll just say it here. I think Benavidez is going to win that fight. Jose Cito Lopez is fighting on that undercard. Mario Barrios is going to be fighting on that same card. And I think, I don't know why, but Robert Guerrero, the Ghost, he's fighting again. Why? I don't know. Someone tell him to retire. And also an interesting middleweight, junior middleweight prospect by the name of Joey Spencer. He's out of the Chicago area. I've heard a lot of positive things about him, so you might want to check. So we may talk about him as well. So next week is going to be mainly a preview show, previewing the big fight that's going to happen in LA, Spence Porter. So for Gus from Corruption in Boxing, for Gail from Community Digital News, Jacob of Jap Boxing, Daniel from the Inscriber. I want to thank Quantum for his comments in the chat. Thanks for joining us on the live YouTube show. Thank you for your questions and your comments. I am your host, Michael. This has been episode 266 of the Pound for Pound Box Report. We'll see you guys next time. Everyone have a good evening. Good night.
Later.
Hi, everybody.